This is Innovation Connected, coming to you from the World Economic Forum in Davos, a podcast by Tenity.
My name is Max Planck. I'm a venture partner for Tenity, and I would like to welcome my esteemed guest from Hong Kong, Priscilla. Welcome.
Thank you.
So can you give us a brief background about yourself, what you did so far, and how you ended up in Hong Kong?
Sure. So I started my career in traditional banking. So in my world now in crypto, refer to it as TradFi. Spent a number of years so working abroad, so Argentina, UK, Germany, before moving out to Hong Kong. And in terms of my story, what happened, I was working in compliance for a number of years at HSBC. And I remember coming back after maternity leave and speaking to my boss and saying, look, thinking about my next role, what is HSBC's view on crypto and virtual assets for the future? And the response that I got back was, well, maybe one day we'll do something with CBDCs. And given that HSBC is a large bank, it's a very fair comment. But for me personally, it wasn't really the direction that I wanted to go in, and ended up kind of right place, right time, and joining Bullish. And for those of you who don't know Bullish, so Bullish is best known at the moment for being a large institutional-focused crypto exchange. We're currently regulated out of Gibraltar, also out of Germany, and we have some additional licenses in the mix. Bullish, though, it also, and what I look at is I look after non-exchange compliance predominantly, and that includes things like our venture capital arm, looking at investments into crypto, our OTC desk. Bullish also owns several other businesses, including the CoinDesk brand, best known for its media services, the Consensus business, as well, and CC Data, so data businesses.
Thank you. Maybe we go one step back. So you ended up in compliance. How
did that happen?
How did that happen?
Basically, the world went crazy with DPAs. So look, my view professionally has always been to kind of go after different opportunities. And so even though my first role with HSBC was in retail banking and wealth management, a lot of times then the way the roles worked within the bank was a role comes up and that's where you go. And so I moved then into risk management pretty early on in my career, went into risk consulting briefly as well. And then with compliance, I was working out in Hong Kong at that point in time for KPMG. And that was really when all of the DPAs were hitting. And so there was a need for compliance expertise. And so for me personally, started with AML investigations, then moving into governance, reporting, strategic change, and a wide variety of areas across financial crime compliance, and then now at Bullish, also going into more of the market integrity, regulatory compliance as well.
Okay. What would you personally think is the most important one of these?
Of the areas of compliance?
Exactly, yeah.
Ooh, I think within the context of crypto, if I frame it that way, it depends slightly. I think we understand more of the financial crime risks. I think that's one of the reasons why the regulation in the crypto industry really went into financial crime and AML quickly, because of the nature of the assets being anonymous and being cross-border. And so it's something that was easy to latch onto. What was less understood at the time was around, I think, market integrity. That really didn't come up, so market manipulation, until FTX. Now, I think what's interesting at the moment is I wouldn't necessarily say that one is more important than the other. You have the same spectrum of risks that you have in TradFi. But what's different is you get this overlay of traditional risks plus the tech aspects. And so the crimes can be committed in a different way, or the tools that you need to assess them or to mitigate the risks are different as well than what you would get just coming from TradFi.
Sure, but I mean, in the end, the regulatory framework plays a role, right?
If one exists.
Exactly. So now coming back to the question, which one do you think is more important? Because some are more regulated and some less, right? Depending on the jurisdiction.
Depending on the jurisdiction,
Or is that wrong?
it's not that it's wrong. It's just, it's a bit binary. So I don't think it's necessarily, if there's regulation, the regulation is going after the most material risk. I think there are some other components to it. I think that regulators often look at building a regulatory framework based off of the type of market that they want to drive, right? So I see this if you compare Hong Kong and Singapore, which is just my main reference point, and you see, okay, the Hong Kong regulation is very much focused coming from that capital markets background that Hong Kong is known for.
Yeah.
With Singapore, it's much lower emphasis on capital markets. They don't really support exchanges. They want more the asset management or the tokenization kind of feeding into the types of markets that they already have. So I think there is also like a bit of an agenda, and it depends a bit. Like regulators are going to look at what type of business and what type of industry is in their jurisdiction and shape the regulations according to the types of risks and businesses that come from that, because they see in their jurisdiction that that's the most material risk based off of their experience.
Okay. I mean, it's always
I'm
difficult.
still not fully answering your question, but
Yes.
that's fine.
It's always difficult to talk about regulators when you are in a compliance role, isn't it? I mean, also to value the different regulatory frameworks. Nevertheless, let's go maybe over to Europe, which is starting to regulate a lot. You recently did a license in the European Union, and maybe you can explain a bit how that was. I mean, the MiCA framework is quite new. You have some experience in other jurisdictions. How was the process, and also how was it working with a European regulator?
Sure. So I'd say obviously BaFin's a mature regulator, quite sophisticated. I think what surprised me was that the areas of emphasis for BaFin were different than the areas of focus that we've seen from other regulators. And I think part of that is driven by just the nature of what is in focus in Germany right now. So if you look at things like privacy, right, there's a relationship between the emphasis on data privacy and the individual protections that I think comes through in part of that application. Cybersecurity, third-party risks, these are areas that came into a lot more focus than they've come up in other jurisdictions.
Yes.
But otherwise, it was a pretty quick process, relatively speaking, which is, Germany is not always known for being quick in terms of bureaucratic processes. But all in all, I think BaFin knew that we were working towards that end of December timeline in order to be grandfathered into MiCA. And now we're working on the MiCA transition as the next step of that process. And I think that's always quite important, of being able to build the relationship with the regulators as well, so that you're on the same page with what the different goals are. Because the last thing that you want as a regulated entity is to have an antagonistic relationship with the regulators.
Yes, sure. Did you also look into other regulators in the European Union before deciding where you go?
Yeah, there's always a bit of analysis that goes into where we choose to go for licenses.
Okay. And you talked about counterparty risk was more an important factor here in the European Union compared to other jurisdictions.
No, I said cybersecurity.
Oh, okay. Good. Then I thought that the counterparty risk was...
Or you mean the third-party risk?
Yeah, sorry, yeah.
Okay,
risk, yeah,
but
sorry.
I'd say so. But third-party risk, the weird one there, in my opinion, was that's not really a crypto-specific risk. So that's third-party risk of your vendors and suppliers, business continuity planning, et cetera, as opposed to when we start talking counterparty risk in crypto, a lot of it comes up in a couple of areas. It can come up in travel rule. It can come up when you're dealing with DeFi and those areas as well.
So it's all a lot of complex words here also, probably what you're doing. Maybe you can explain each of them. That would be also very helpful.
Okay, sure. So counterparty risk and travel rules. So FATF, Actually, FATF was second to the party on travel rules. So technically speaking, the travel rule dates back to a much older piece of regulation coming from the U.S. That basically says that whenever there's a financial transaction, that certain pieces of information need to be conveyed from the sender to the originator to the receiver or beneficiary. And so FATF picked this up and said, well, to help solve this problem of anonymity with crypto transactions, we should be looking at how you send and receive these messages. A lot of people compare this to what SWIFT does in TradFi. So, if you've ever tried to send money internationally, you need to get a SWIFT code. And that SWIFT code basically allows banks on the payment side to see the information that's going back and forth.
Yeah, so everything technically.
Everything technically, which is why, the irony is that, that's why crypto came up, was to avoid sharing this kind of information. Anyway.
So what does the rule now say? That would be interesting.
So now what it is, I think most people understand that with the travel rule, there is that message that needs to be sent and received.
Yes.
However, I think there's often a lack of understanding that you also need to be doing due diligence on your counterparty. So what do I mean by that? So let's say that a client from Bullish wants to send crypto to a wallet. So we'll deal with first party payments or in most jurisdictions, but wants to send a payment or a crypto transaction to, say, Binance. Then, technically speaking, what's supposed to happen under travel rule is that Bullish then sends a message, Binance receives it, and the transaction is done. However, it's a lot easier said than done, because what happens in crypto is all of these large exchanges are dealing with different entities in different jurisdictions. And it's not like that when you're sending money in a banking context, and okay, I'm sending it from HSBC Hong Kong to HSBC Singapore. Yeah. You have no idea which jurisdictions you're dealing with. And so you don't know who your counterparty is. Is your counterparty a regulated entity? Is your counterparty a Seychelles shell company?
But you know it when you do it between the banks, right? You don't know it when you do.
Correct. You know it with the banks. You don't know it with crypto. And that's where I think it's one of the challenges with implementation. And I think regulators have been a bit more relaxed about it because they realize that there are challenges. But there's really very little data available today to help understand who you're dealing with.
But how can you solve that?
How can you solve that? I mean, there are a couple of solutions that are trying to come up with basically compiling data to say which entities, so we refer to them as VAS, so virtual asset service providers, or in the EU, CASP, so crypto asset service providers. So there are companies that are trying to pull together the data. I'd say, though, that a lot more collaboration is needed, both from the industry side, also from the government side. You have some jurisdictions. So, for example, Estonia, it's very easy, provided you use Google Translate, to go up on their website and figure out if an entity is actually registered there. Other jurisdictions, it's very difficult to know if a VASP that claims to be regulated is actually regulated, because very little information is published. So I think the data gap needs to be solved. I think a lot more collaboration in the industry is needed, also between public and private organizations as well, if regulators actually want to see the travel rule implemented. Yeah,
but it's a problem more for the exchanges in the end of the day, right? If they would like to comply, they have to have counterparties.
Oh, but you assume there are no workarounds and loopholes, which there are. And so I think that's the other problem is if it gets to be too difficult, then, and actually Switzerland was the first one on this one to start doing unhosted wallets instead, because unhosted, or we call self-hosted wallets. So these are crypto wallets that are not sitting on a centralized exchange. So either you have the tech background to create your own wallet and custody your own assets at the risk of them being stolen, or now you've got providers like Fireblocks that are technically self-custody solutions as well. So all of those groups of wallets are technically outside of the scope of travel rule.
But it's probably the bracket way. So the salami tactic. There's a regulation coming, and then the next loophole will be closed. Or what is your impression talking to regulators? I mean, they are aware of that.
They're aware, and they're not. Some regulators are pushing more. I think there's I think what will be interesting to see with FATF, so FATF, the Financial Action Task Force, there's a question as to whether or not they'll start putting in requirements in the country assessments as to whether or not the country is actually enforcing travel rule. And I think once you get a stick that big, then you can actually start to change behaviors, even if it's not an ideal
What are
way.
the fines for that? Is there already an idea what fines are if you're not comply with the travel rule?
That's the problem, is that no one's really started fining people for non-compliance.
Not yet.
Next loophole, right?
Next
so
loophole.
Next loophole
So
is
you
there.
work
You have
in
to
a
have
loophole.
enforcement. I work in crypto. There are loopholes and gray areas everywhere.
That's the reason why you chose it.
No, I chose it because it's interesting, right?
But it's interesting because it changes a lot.
It changes a lot. It's very dynamic, right? And I've mentioned in speaking before, like, if you compare the pace of regulatory change and you think about MiFID II, and when you do comparisons to MiFID, and when you look at it from the actual start and the first introduction of the regulation back until it's actually fully implemented, it's like 30 years. And then seriously, it's basically 30 years from start to finish.
Yeah.
But then you compare that to how quickly regulations have come in, like since FTX, you had some instances where regulation was introduced within 12 months.
Yeah.
So it is very dynamic. It is changing. And so you see the business evolving and criminality evolving along with it too.
But FTX is not a crypto problem or a digital assets problem. It was a corporate finance problem,
Yes.
isn't it?
Yes,
So,
it was.
yeah.
But this is the thing, as I mentioned at the start, that the financial crime aspects with crypto have been understood, arguably overestimated in some senses. I'll caveat that, not 100%, but when something's understood and visible, it's easy for a regulator to latch onto it. I think what happened with FTX, you're right. It was a corporate governance failure and just fraud with asset rehypothecation.
Yep.
However, regulators hadn't thought of necessarily pulling those aspects of traditional regulation and applying it to crypto firms. And so it became a crypto problem. Because there was, I think, this aha moment that something's not actually fully covered.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, in Europe, you had also similar problems in the past. Nevertheless, I think you also have the trustees, the auditors, the regulator, the tax authorities. So there's a lot of people who have to understand what that means.
But,
And,
but at the same time, like for an entity like Bullish, for example, we're regulated. We have a Big Four auditor. We are doing those things. And I think that's something also that if you're not investing in or actively trading crypto, but now what happens when you have a bull run is more people get interested and they just start putting their assets wherever and they don't actually know to look for those things. Then that's also, it goes back into this kind of consumer protection issue because they don't know what's real, what's legit, and then your fraud rates start to rise.
So what happened the last days in the United States?
The new president and his wife have tokenized themselves, which is an interesting one. Who would have thought?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, probably that's. I heard here in Davos a couple of different views on that.
All right, tell me your views, and then I'll give you mine.
Well, it is more the question like how the industry is seen, because it looks a bit it looks a bit meme coins. I mean, there's no value behind it, and it's even said already. But there's money flowing in a couple of billions already.
No, but this is the thing about crypto. And I remember I was speaking with a colleague, and I was doing due diligence on this one like DeFi protocol, and I said to him, I honestly don't understand why people would pour like millions, if not billions of dollars into a protocol where all they know is that it's run by someone dressed up like a bear. And
Good question. What did your colleague answer?
it's like, because it's fun.
Yeah.
And so I think that this is kind of the weirdness of crypto and something that makes it great. Although just don't lose your money on it would be my recommendation. And this is not investment advice.
Of course.
And with meme coins, financial markets, they're a very serious topic, and everyone takes the image of Wall Street bankers and investors very seriously, right? We see that also if you just eavesdrop walking around here on the streets in Davos this week as well. But then you get something like meme coins, so billions of dollars being poured in with arguably no value attached, but it's a lot of fun.
Well, for whom?
For whom? Yeah, for whom?
Sorry.
Yeah, and this is where it does get a little bit tricky, and this is where I actually see a lot of risk. Is people see, oh, okay, there's a Trump coin, there's a Melania coin, there are all of these meme coins, and a couple of things. Investors or just average retail users might not understand that there is no value attached to this. They might not be reading all the same types of journals or getting the information about what is or is not behind it. Secondly, with a lot of these meme coins, it's very hard to know, and this goes back to, again, some of that information asymmetry and lack of data. It's very hard to know how deep the liquidity actually is. So how many users are there? How thinly traded is it? Are you just having a bunch of pump and dump? And that's where you get a handful of users who are holding the bulk of the coins. They're trading it amongst themselves, and then they're going to dump it at some point, walk away with a lot of money. And the retail users who thought, hey, let me buy this before Inauguration Day, are going to try to get out of it when it's tanked. And it's classic market manipulation. It's a very real phenomenon within crypto. And one of the things that does give crypto a bad name.
Yes.
So that's when the fun goes away.
Or ends.
Yeah. Yeah.
Actually, it's interesting. So this is what I heard here on that side. The other side is more that you have more this real world asset tokenization, but more on the liquid side, and that's probably quite strong also in Asia.
Yeah.
I mean, what is your take on that?
I think the real world asset, and I'm old enough that when I hear the word RWA, I go back to risk weighted assets and like the 2008 financial crisis. So the fact that we're using RWA in a completely different context, like, still throws me. Yeah. Anyway, tokenization, I think that's really the bridge for TradFi institutions to move towards all things blockchain, right? You see a number of banks moving towards tokenized deposits. You see where jurisdictions are starting to offer central bank digital currencies or CBDCs. Those are typically targeting wholesale users. Some target both wholesale and retail, but mostly wholesale. So you see also some of the big banks starting to weigh in and support transactions on the blockchain for CBDCs. You're also seeing things like the ETFs and the spot ETFs. Those were very big in 2024. Another example of tokenized assets where your BlackRocks, your Franklin Templetons are starting to play. The interesting thing that I've seen, though, is there was a very big push for tokenized treasuries, and this was the end of 2023 going into 2024. And then it kind of, all the hype faded. But I really think that was a lot of deep crypto people putting their money into something crypto-like because they weren't able to get yields anywhere else. And now what you've seen is a movement away from tokenized treasuries as like an asset class or a store of value, because you can now get like 30% yield coming from DeFi protocols directly. So you see these things shift as well. So you see more users and you see a lot of money flowing in and out of the industry. I think also one of the great things about crypto and blockchain more broadly is that it's so broad and the technology is so broad-based that there's a space to play, whether it is a traditional bank, whether it's a crypto bro, for lack of a better phrase, or if it's, meme coin people. So it's a very broad industry, and that's what we've seen with the growth of it, since Bitcoin came out 16 years ago.
Okay. So what are the hot topics in 2025 for, let's say, digital assets?
For digital assets more broadly.
Yeah.
I think meme coins are going to be flavor of the month for the next 6 months. I think there is a fair amount of hype. And just like we had the NFT craze and the ICO craze as well. So meme coins, I think, will eventually fizzle a bit, but they're going to be here for a while. I am starting to also see now some convergence around AI and crypto and AI and digital assets. I think there's some interesting projects going on there. You also hear this week at Davos, like the heavy emphasis on AI and innovation. I think that that's an interesting area to be watching. I think the DeFi yields, a lot of the staking protocols are still going to be an area of focus. And then for the less kind of crypto native firms, you are going to see an increase in tokenized assets, RWAs, driving more institutional adoption.
Is this the first time you came to Davos?
Yes. So first time in Davos, not my first time in Switzerland, but I was fortunate to be invited to speak on DeFi with 1inch. So for those of you who don't know 1inch, they are one of the larger DeFi aggregators in the crypto and digital asset space, and then also spoke at the Global Business Blockchain Council, GBBC, yesterday as well. So it's been a lot of crypto, but it's been a good experience so far.
What was your expectation when you traveled here?
My expectation... it's been good people watching, so it's been a good entertainment value as well.
Yeah.
But no, I think one thing that surprised me was, when you come into Davos, like it's just like any other village. There's not, once you get into the area around here where the events are going on, you see some of the like secure areas and what have you. But otherwise, very easy, very accessible. Almost if you didn't know that something was going on, then you wouldn't know, if that makes sense.
And what have you learned so far? What changed your opinion maybe before and after Davos? Was there something, like you had a perception on something and then had a different view on that when you talked to people?
I think what I've been I think a couple of things that have struck me since arriving yesterday are, so one, working in crypto, I end up seeing like a very kind of extreme view in terms of not everybody knows a lot of the ins and outs of DeFi. Not everybody knows a lot of the ins and outs of crypto compliance. And so for me, it's been useful to be listening to other panels as almost a sense check of what a lot of common knowledge and understanding is, and what people are talking about. And for me, it's like bringing it back almost 2 steps. And I think that that's important also when I think about my everyday job. And on Bullish, even though we're focused on institutional investors, we also have some retail investors. And then you start thinking, okay, when you get into things like consumer protection, why is it important? What are the education pieces that are missing? Because I do see a disconnect between what people are talking about on the streets here and even in a lot of the panels that I've been attending versus what's on kind of the cutting edge of the industry itself.
Okay, and what is the takeaway? What's the difference?
I think there's a lot of education that's required. Also, especially in this in the market that we're in, although it's not the same level of being a bull run as it was at the end of 2024, with Bitcoin now expected to kind of sink back a little bit below 100K mark. At the same time, the industry is continuing to attract users and adoption will increase. And there is a risk of another FTX moment where something really goes wrong and the industry gets blamed, rightly or wrongly, for it. And so that education piece, I think, is absolutely critical, so that users know who they're dealing with and that the industry really shows that it's maturing and isn't just about meme coins and playing with other people's money.
Wow. So thank you for that. And yeah, I wish you a good time in Davos and safe travel back.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you.